I think when it comes to reinventing the wheel or not reinventing the wheel, you only have to look at a lot of political writing to find that a lot of it is incredibly formulaic. And I think this is where Graeme Archer, who's to my left, is incredibly different. I've known Graeme for about 6 years, and he's in his day job he's actually a professional statistician, but he's also, I think, one of the most talented writers that I've met, and I'm incredibly jealous of his work. In 2011, he won the Orwell Prize for political blogging, and I think it's worth reading what the judges said about that. They said Graeme Archer is a blogger with wonderful elegance and clarity. Whether he writes on party politics or just about what he sees around him in Hackney, he is sharply observant and invariably thought-provoking. His posts are engaging or disconcerting in turns, regardless of the political views of the reader. Graeme Archer is, in the unanimous verdict of the judges, the one blogger who did most last year to make good political blogging into an art. Now, Graeme's now a columnist in the Daily Telegraph. His column appears on a Saturday. And today he's here to give you an insight into how he writes. And frankly, I can't wait to hear what he has to say. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ben. I can't tell you. Well, you can all hear me, I know, but let me check. Do you understand me? I know in my ears, in my head, I have a educated Ayrshire accent, but I know the truth is more akin to Rab C. Nesbitt on helium. So if it becomes, I mean, the content, I'm not allowed to say content after the pan. If the content is one thing, but I'd hate to lose you through the accent. So if it gets to Glaswegian, shout something in Cockney at me. I'm so honoured to be invited to be here at your conference, and I'm feeling terrified, clearly, and inappropriate, Bill Hilton's least favourite word, because to my mind, and I'm going to explain why, I find it very difficult to think of myself as a writer, and here I am in a room full of people who have achieved what I've dreamt of since I was a very young statistician and make a career out of writing. So really I feel this whole day is sort of inverted, and I'm the guy sat at the back trying to learn from all of you. So we have a problem right at the start, that I'm clearly not a camera, and that was genuine. I'm half terrified of the material. What on earth can a statistician? I've been writing for the Telegraph for 2 years, as Ben said, but I can't talk to you about that really. A bit. What can I talk to you about? I thought, well, when Ben asked me, I thought, well, why not some metaphor or something? You know, I'm a scientist, and this whole thing about metaphor is quite exciting, so I'll come and talk to you about that. Because I'm not a writer, trained, I'm not going to do that. And I thought, well, what does that leave me with? Basically, I thought I could tell you. Well, I am a writer, so here's an example. This is my most recent publication, and if I was talking to you about the substance P ligand and its role in the stress activation complex, and how we seek at GlaxoSmithKline, where I work Monday to Friday, to modulate that in order to achieve an antidepressant effect, all of those nerves that are horribly visible would disappear. But I put it in for a reason, because it did remind me that although I thought what do I have in common with people who actually make a career out of writing, I do have contact with a lot of you. Is anyone here a medical writer, for example? No. So hi. So all our publications that we come up with, despite what you read in the Guardian newspaper about the pharma industry, all of our clinical trial data is published, whether it's positive like this one or the next one with my name on negative. And there's so much to do. We work a lot with medical writers. So I thought, well, that grounds me a little. I do have some knowledge of what you do for a living. But you don't want to hear about, does anyone want to hear about substance P and the neurokinin? No, I didn't think so. So what does that leave me with? That leaves me with, thought I'd just tell you some of the things I really like about writing, and because I'm Scottish, right-wing and miserable, I'd start with what I really hate about some writing. And the one good thing about writing for the Telegraph is I'm used to abuse on Twitter. So if I'm about to upset a large proportion of the audience, I imagine. So if you feel free to, I'm a Twitter whore. I have put 628 followers. Even Charles Moore's been on Twitter for about 3 minutes, and he's got 10 million followers. So do feel free to abuse me on Twitter. What do I hate? Some examples of what I hate about writing, and then in terms of copy, what I really detest. And then my sort of journey, and I'm afraid, I fear I'm probably going to talk a little about myself. I'll try not to. But I wanted to explain how it was I try to go about it and see if it rings any bells with anybody. So what do I hate about writing? I hate this woman. I have detested, because I'm a scientist and clearly inadequate and suffer a huge inferiority complex. When I was at the university in Glasgow, I went to the 6th floor of the library and basically worked my way through the English canon, because I knew I was missing out on this whole aspect of existence, and that's probably where, well, you'll see later some of the people that stayed with me that I loved then. But when I got to Virginia Woolf, I really got stuck. You know that feminist theory about the male gaze? I don't know enough about that sort of sociology to comment on it, but when I look at this famous picture of Mrs. Woolf, I see a gaze there. It's the gaze of someone born to power, and she's looking at us, she's not of us. And this is something I dislike. Famously, of course, she said, a writer needs a room of one's own, and again, she was thinking particularly of women, but I don't see there's this idea that writers require a space to inhabit in order to be commenting on something outside of them, and it may be true. It doesn't work for me, and I don't like it. Here's the famous letter Mrs. Woolf wrote to Virginia Woolf wrote to the New Statesman, and it explains, I think, I came across this only recently. I finally achieved a life ambition, and 2 weekends ago in the Telegraph managed to mention how much I detested Virginia Woolf just before the new editor arrived, who's a Woolfian scholar or something. So this maybe my last, first and last. But she wrote this famous letter to the New Statesman in which she's proud to describe herself as a highbrow, and I think that explains what I don't like about that gaze she has, the way she looks at people and discusses them. And she goes on and she makes it even worse. These lowbrows are waiting after the day's work in the rain, sometimes for hours, to get into the cheap seats and sit in hot theatres in order to see what their lives look like. People who write like that, I don't want to read. So I think you don't need a room. How did I get to this? Oh, here's another example. Does anyone work for Paddy Power? I'm sorry. One thing, when you start writing in the paper, you get millions and millions of press releases sent to you. And one of I noticed after a while, first of all, when they first came, I thought, panel discussion, you'd be pleased to know. When I first started getting these press releases, I thought, oh my God, they're writing to me. I wrote back to a couple saying, thank you so much for writing to me. I noticed after a while that there were some I particularly loathed, and with apologies to Paddy Power, it is your type of writing that I really hate. They say here, come and bet on the American shutdown. With American shutdown for almost a full week now, there have been significant changes in the betting regarding how long it might last. Of course, I'm a Calvinist from the west of Scotland. I'm trained not to like betting, but here's the other one that's worse. Paddy Power opened the betting on next to leave Commonwealth. As Gambia have underlined the bits I really hate, jack in their Commonwealth membership. We've begun speculating who's next to bite the bullet and head for the exit door. Press the eject button. The UK props up the pile. For my pound, I'd fancy a punt in Rwanda. There's something repellent about this. It's treating life, real life, outside as something separate To the writer, I can't recognise anything worthy in such an endeavour. And it's not just writing. I know these people are very popular, but I don't feel like they're comedy. And I thought there's a link between what it is I don't like about this sort of stuff. Those press releases from Paddy Power and Virginia Woolf, and I've forgotten it, I wrote it down on the train this morning. Although we started in Hackney, we both fled to the suburbs. It's ironic detachment. Any writing which has this air of lofty detachment, of looking at life as a specimen, I dislike. Everything is not funny. So slightly more positively, landscape is, I think, then, not my version of her room. Why? Because in 2008, I went to St. Petersburg and Moscow and various other places in the heart of Russia, in the middle of nowhere, for GlaxoSmithKline. There were three of us went. I was project leader for a molecule we were developing in the hope it would become an antidepressant. Because of some very early safety signals in the healthy volunteer studies, we wanted this first trial in the patient population to be in an inpatient setting. As you know, the standard of care in depression in the UK is that most people are treated as outpatients via their GP or some other clinic. Only very, very serious patients whom we wouldn't obviously wish to go to in the first clinical trial are treated in hospitals. However, in Russia, the standard of care is still to treat most depression in the hospitalised setting. So that seemed to us to be a good fit for our first trial. So the decision was made to run the clinical trial in Russia. Myself, Frank and Angela were dispatched to go and meet the potential investigators, we call them investigators, psychiatrists in Russian hospitals, and persuade them that the protocol, the clinical trial we wanted to do was an ethical good bet, that they would want to take part. Something happened, something changed in me. I went there as a statistician and I came back changed, and so I was thinking, what was it that changed? I found it very just confusing. Not just the Lenin spelt with lambdas and so forth. You can see in my face there, I was perplexed. In the evenings, the local operating company took us to these amazing places. This is the Cafe Europa in St. Petersburg, and then in the day next day we'd get back in the van and drive. One day we drove 600 miles through this landscape. I'd never been that far east before, and then in the evening we'd come back and sit down with some colleagues in Russia and enjoy these beautiful meals they were treating us, and then the next day we'd get back in the van and drive through the landscape again to places like this. You think this is unbelievable, but only when we got to the door of the first psychiatric hospital did I realise we were going to go inside secure areas within the institutions and meet the psychiatrists and their patients in secure wards. And in Russia, there's no differentiation between mood disorders like depression and the extreme psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, certainly not in any of the hospitals that we visited. And in this one, and then we go back, and then back. In this one, the staff and the patients were so keen to show us examples of all the things. They have a photo montage like this. I took a picture of all the activities that they did. So we were going in my picture. Here's some patients coming out, and this is some nurses doing the laundry. There's somebody being visited by his relative. Families are encouraged to come in and see their staff, and here at their devotions in their hospital pyjamas. And it's not an understatement to say this was transformational to me. I'm not the same person as I was before I went to there, and something happened. I wanted to write about this. I got knocked out of this groove of just trundling through thinking, do scientific clinical trial, blah, 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 research, and started thinking what we do affects human beings, and I want to write about it. I want to write about it somehow as though I'm watching it pass the bus window, but I want to write about politics on the substrate of their humanity, almost, which reminded me of this book that I loved. I've jumped groove, and that reminded me of this book. The best way, I think, to write about politics is in the micro scale, the big changes you see reflected in the lives of human beings, and it follows from that you want to write about them, then write about them as one of them, and not with this gaze from a distance. Other influences on my life was, this is Edwin Morgan. I don't know if none of you, who's Scottish? Yeah, so we all did Edwin Morgan when we were at school, didn't we? And one phrase, with a ragged diamond, stuck in my mind, has always stuck in my mind, from this poem. It's called An Instamatic Poem, Glasgow, 5 March 1971. With a ragged diamond of a shattered plate glass, a young man and his girl are falling backwards into a shop window. There's a kinetic drive to this writing, as well as it capturing an instant frame in time, and there's no separation, obviously, between the author and the subjects in the sentence. I try to mimic, obviously I fail at, but this to me is an example of the sort of writing about, if you could write like this about politics, then I think you'd be achieving something worthwhile. Check. Other people another woman who influenced my life in the opposite sense to Virginia Woolf is a certain lady. This is Iris Murdoch. Who's read an Iris Murdoch novel? Yeah, a good half of us. I'm not a philosopher. I can't comment on the Platonic yearning for the good that she uses her novels to explore, although I think I saw some of it in that hospital in St. Petersburg. But what I did get from Iris is, in her novels there's lots of dialogue at parties. Do you remember that? There's always sometimes pages and pages without the dialogue being located in the mouth of a particular character, and you just get this amazing bubbling sense of the information flowing between the characters through the use of dialogue. And I've definitely deliberately copied that. If you ever read my stuff, you see there's lots of dialogue. And one of the things, there's some guy on Twitter really hates me, and I won't say his name.
Go on.
No, I won't. It's just absurdly malicious about me, and he always says, "You made that up. You made that up." And I wish I could make up dialogue. If I could, I would write a novel. But there's definitely a trick to just tuning in to what people round about you are saying and just copying it down verbatim and not trying to correct its grammar, which is going to contradict something that comes on later. I do deliberately use that method a lot, and I find it appealing in other people's work. I've got an example, I think, in a minute. Something else that all good writers do. Here's a quote from John Bailey, who's Iris Murdoch's husband, of course. With the power, I found this is in the latest edition of the Iris Murdoch newsletter. With the power and breadth of curiosity, which is one of the clearest signs of their genius, both Henry James and Jane Austen feel their way into radically different kinds of consciousness. The good as well as the clever, the simple and instinctive as well as the vital and the knowledgeable, the high, the middle and the lowbrow. I suspect he was thinking of Iris here as well, and this, although it's the hardest for me to attempt to put in words, and I certainly don't think I do it very well, this to me is the contrast between that Paddy Power type press release style of writing and the sort of writing which I think is beautiful, when the writer has looked and listened and then attempted to inhabit the skin of the people he or she wants to write about. And I guess a way of saying that is without empathy. I think writing is a pointless, sterile activity. Okay, I've got 18 minutes, 32 seconds left, and I just have this amazing gift of... and I'm nearly out of slides, so I hope you've all got really horrible questions. Here's an example which I think did it perfectly just last Saturday. Who reads Matthew Paris on Saturday morning? Even Telegraph writers are allowed to admit that they love Matthew Paris on Saturday mornings. Click I'm on a bus to Labour's conference hall in Brighton. Click. In the hall, Ed Miliband will prance and pout, flanked by 2 huge video versions of him. Click. On the bus, a sad, neatly dressed lady in her 50s is telling a bearded, t-shirted fellow with a belly that our hope for romance is not going well. He has my number, but he hasn't texted. And the supermarket called her in early for extra till duty. And I had to bolt down my breakfast because I like to be reliable. And then had no work for her after all. The rest of the passage is I hope you agree with me, equally beautiful. I find this beautiful. This is the sort of political writing which I most admire and attempt shamelessly to copy in my own life. It's at the opposite end of the spectrum to that let's all have a laugh at something horrible happening to people who are not really human beings. Notice that he doesn't make any political comment here at all, and you can tell from the verbatim description of the text you overheard in the bus. Actually, Matthew, if you're reading, I think I did that first 2 years ago, but never mind. A Brighton bus as well, I'll have you. Best place on the planet. He just writes it down, he doesn't comment on it. And yet you know that what he's thinking is, it's really crap that people have to put up with this lack of power in their life, and none of these politicians are doing anything to address it on their stage-managed conferences. And this from a person who doesn't go in for the easy knocking of politicians, another thing I admire hugely about him. I thought it was the best piece of commentary on this conference season, and a beautiful example of how I wish more political writing was constructed. And this is probably the wrong thing. This is a piece of my writing which I remain proud of. I wrote it on Conservative Home. It's one of the pieces that won the Orwell Prize in 2010, called Exhibit 1, The Hipster Loses His Girl. I see his heavy eyelids flutter, in the words of the song. There's a prize if you know which song. He's desperate to impress the girl sat across from him, so nervous to create the right coolest fuck impression that his fingers are fumbling over the pathetic roll-up he's trying to make. Shreds of tobacco float away in the warm summer air. Now, I'm still proud of it, and I wish I could write like this more easily. It's always, for me, it's an exercise to try to, does this ring a bell? Sometimes there is a gel, some sort of invisible gel, which pulls all your words together, and you don't know what it is that you were going to achieve when you start at the top of the page, but when it's done you sort of look back. This must be how people who paint portraits well feel, they know it's worked. And then other times it's a bit sort of, I'll send that one to the blog. Don't tell them I said that. I was amazed actually, this is that panel talking about money in blogging. Kind of the newspaper industry, which is dying on its feet. Most bloggers on naming no names, but not a million miles away from Buckingham Palace Road, would be astonished to earn £400 for writing a blog. Astonished. A large proportion of them do it for nothing. And I think there's a market, when there's so many people writing, the market is huge, and of course it's going to drive down prices. Anyway, I remain proud of this, but because I was coming here, I didn't put it up to show off. I thought, if I look back at it now, 3 years later, what would I change in the light of what I've been saying about the way that I think good writing should be? And just in that first paragraph, I'd keep the dialogue, obviously. It's all true. It's outside the Cat and Mutton, Ben, a pub you may remember.
Very well.
Yes, where we met. There's 2 things I would change. I hope you can guess. I would take out, when I adjectives, it's good writing advice, isn't it? I'd take out cool as fuck before saying he's just trying to create the right impression, and I'd take out pathetic, because that was me inserting myself into the mind of another. And it's one thing to, it's difficult, isn't it? It's one thing to I got in a lot of trouble actually for this blog, because there's another part, I think in Exhibit 2, I do it again, and because it was in Hackney, Diane Abbott picked up on it and started this Twitter storm. You put words in the minds of these people, and she's right, unfortunately, for once. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. So Diane Abbott, who, great champion of the poor, sends her children to the most expensive public schools in Britain, even she is occasionally correct. I would, a little bit of politics. I would take out the adjectives. That's it. So in summing up, really, I don't know if any of this was even coherent enough, and even were it to have been coherent, if it rings any bells. That's what I was hoping for. For me, I need some sort of sense of landscape, and then to switch off. This is the bit where I think being like a camera helps. Switch myself off and look with my eyes and listen with my ears, and just try to write that down as quickly as possible. That's the rushing past bit, the Edwin Morgan instamatic bit. And then permission to inhabit the other without going too far. So empathize with the people more than just feeling sorry or angry with them, but don't go too far, of course. And the permission to do that, of course, comes from yourself. It's not anyone else who's going to give that to you. You don't need a room, but a view can be helpful. I do most, Virginia Woolf wouldn't believe it, but I do most of my writing there on the beach in Brighton, especially when it's not raining. Of course, you do need some more mechanical considerations. I love this picture because it has my husband in it. He's an electrician. You need to get the wiring right. And I did want to make this point in amongst all these press releases that I get. I mean, literally hundreds a week, and I do look at. I'll tell you, the best one that came was from. I probably did keep it. What's the woman's name? I can't remember the woman's name. She's PR for some studio doctor, and said, "We writed to you to see if you would like to write in the Telegraph, having benefited from a full hair transplant, which my client would be happy to offer you." And she told me some other guy that had done it. I can't remember the name. Thank you very much, but I'm fine, honestly. But why the picture of the workman? Because you have to get the basics right, and a horrible large number of these professional bits of copy that get sent out to journalists everywhere, and a horrible large number of journalist copy as well, of course, are riven with grammatical, spelling, syntactical errors, and I can't think of a worse turn-off in a piece of copy. And think always of the clients who pay money to have somebody send out an email or a press release or an invitation to a hair transplant that's littered with spelling mistakes. That to me is impossible. Obviously that sort of goes without saying. Keith Thursday, because he would be happy to admit that he's lowbrow, he is capable of enjoying Bach. I expect E.M. Forster would have crushed him with a bookcase. This is my back. Immersion into the landscape is the way that I find the writing comes more naturally then. And so, I was in Brighton and bumped into these two guys that used to live in Hackney. Actually, you know them too. And they said, "What are you doing there, Graeme?" And I thought, I'm writing for the Daily Telegraph. And you expect everyone's going to go, "Oh, I know you're." Honestly, the first week it came out, I went to the cafe and sat around like that, waiting for people to come up to me. Because none of you are aware of who I am from Adam. I've sort of got that now. But these are two friends of mine. And I said, "I've been writing for the Telegraph for 2 years." And they went, "Are you?" This was on Friday night. It was Brighton Pride. It's just been out all night, and that's why I'm so hungover. The next morning I bought the paper and said, "Look, I don't know." So maybe I am becoming a writer, but you people are still the people who managed to make a living out of it, which is why I admire you so much. Iris, again, I just love this picture and had to find some reason to use it, but it reminds me of our novel, The Severed Head. I like to imagine it's when she's looking at this, she started thinking about a severed head. And she said, I think in a fairly honourable defeat, that which I have adopted as my dogma. Diane, a bit aside, I'm sorry, Diane. All our failures are ultimately failures in love. I think that's true. That's true in everything we do in life. If you think about it, everything that fails eventually fails because there's not enough love, and that is as true of writing, I would say, as of any other human endeavour, which is probably why I dislike those Paddy Power press releases so much. And I think that's what I was thinking when I looked at those patients. Thank you very much for listening.
I'm speechless with admiration.
Shut up. Shut up.
Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask Graeme?
Thank you.
By the way, that's my Twitter, if anyone wants to follow me. Let's take on Charles Moore.
Am I on? Ooh, I like microphones. Lovely. I want to ask a question, I guess, about morality, which isn't something that, not a topic you'd always expect to hear terribly high up on at a conference of copywriters. If you would take all the people in this room, between us we've probably written more material and it certainly had more readers than J.K. Rowling or John Grisham or whoever. You know, we are anonymous but read by millions. Does that mean we have an obligation? Because we are the people, you know, we are the makers of manners, if you like. We are the people setting an example, far more than any of those novelists. Do you think we have some sort of obligation to, whether it's maintain standards or, you know, use the language in a particular way?
I think yes to both. And I have this, because don't understand your industry properly yet, I think I might have stumbled into one of those big philosophical arguments without knowing about it. I would say yes, that was the whole point of what I was saying. I'm not synthesising the disgust I feel at press releases like that Paddy Power one, and just as I wouldn't put my name at GlaxoSmithKline to a clinical trial protocol which I felt to be unethical, neither would I put my name in any way to a piece of writing which I felt to treat human beings shoddily. Now, we all make mistakes, don't we? There are a few pieces I can look back in my own stuff that make me gulp with horror, because nobody's a good person all the time. I think, as Iris would tell us, part of the point is to strive to be good, and I'm sorry, I do not understand how you can write a jokey memo about a country where gay people are being murdered and thus leave the Commonwealth and think of yourself as a good person. So Bill, yes to that. Please, somebody else, because there's still 5 minutes 31 seconds, and they're not going to. There's a lady here.
Why do we use the language, even if it's just like getting.
Yes, sorry, and you're actually feeding me, so I guess you're being so... Bill I'd never met before, but we know each other on Twitter, and this has been one of the highlights of my day. Apologies to Bill, is getting to put flesh to somebody that exists as this little avatar. It's amazing. Yes, of course, and you didn't say George Orwell. Has everyone read his essay concerning the English language? I hope yes. Shout it out, yes. And we promise we're going to go back before we write another piece for anyone and read it again. And of course he says in it at the end, doesn't he, the purpose of these instructions is that we all break them most of the time, but that he exhibits that sort of disgust there about, I'm thinking in the political sphere obviously, but I don't see why it doesn't apply everywhere, using language in a way which is not designed to be clear and to transmit the intent of the speaker. That's why it's often think it'd be really easy, life would be so much simpler if I could just believe in God, but I can't quite ever bring myself to it. That's why, for whatever reason, if I were a theist, that's why I would say that God gave us the gift of languages to communicate with one another. And if you're deliberately using words in order to separate, the separation between people, the increased atomization of this society we live in now is one of those unspoken about political topics. If you're using language in a way that increases distance by being deliberately obfuscatory, then I think that's a fault, and I believe oh, that's a bad word, is it? Did I use it wrongly?
It's ironic that you said it off, yeah.
Sorry.
It's a really long word.
I know, and it's probably got a Greek root or something like that. So there, I've broken 2 of Orwell's commandments. See, I'm sure, I've told you I'm a scientist, of course it doesn't have a Greek root. What sort of fool is this? There was I think there's a lady here, please. Well, there's clearly a lady here.
First time I've been described as a lady anyway, so that's good. Really fascinating talk. I could listen to you all day.
Thank you.
But I have read more press releases than probably anyone else in this room, and I've written a fair few myself. And it is very easy to look back at the Paddy Power type things and slag off that language. Very easy indeed, when there's often the client factor. You know, there's someone else way up in Paddy, if they have a structure, way up in Paddy Power who said, let's put that bit in, let's put this bit in. So, you know.
Let's make it all jokey and blokey,
Yes,
because
absolutely.
it's really big on Channel 4 right now.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that's right, and
No,
it's
I
not right
understand.
to, you know, just take the money and run, but hey, some people have to. The wider point I'm trying to make is, big fan of Matthew Paris, and you said something like he wasn't really making a political point. He wasn't really making a political point. He was just saying it as it is. And then you gave examples of how you had seen things from the bus, as it were, and turned them into your writing. I was in the House of Commons Press Gallery the day after Dunblane, and Matthew Paris was there too. And there were adults in tears for the whole day, politicians who'd seen everything for the whole day. But what Matthew wrote that day, and if any of you got time, I suggest you go and read what he wrote, was all about politics and comments. He didn't talk about, you know, it was wrong to go and shoot a whole load of primary school kids. I think we worked that out. But in that case, in the Dunblane article, and in every article he ever writes, he may just say, I saw a little lady drinking a cup of tea, and I saw this. But of course he's making a political point. Of course you're making a political point. It's politics. That's what you do.
And so, am I accusing myself of a sin here? My point is that I find that type of writing the most compelling political writing. I didn't mean to leave you with the impression I didn't think Matthew Paris is making a political point. I meant to say that I find this way of writing about politics much more persuasive than full disclosure, before I decided to go for Virginia Woolf, I'm so naive, I was going to bring examples from the newspapers of writing that I detest, and then a little fortunate, when he saw a picture of him, said to me, that's probably not a good idea, which is why poor Paddy Power and Virginia Woolf got it. That sort of writing where they're going, who's winning the battle at Westminster? I find that a complete turn off. Politics is about human beings. It took me a visit to the mental hospital to realise that. But even for non-pathological cases, if you're not writing about the human beings first, then I'm not really interested in what you've got to say about politics. And I can't bear that stuff about who's up and who's down and who's in and who's out. It just leaves me cold. Thank you. 19, 18, 17. Thank you.